Steve Stoute.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. How's everybody feeling? Lunch was good? Good. I had the soup. The soup was fantastic. Yeah, the soup was, I just want to, in case you didn't have the soup, it was the last second run on it right now. So listen, the conversations we've had throughout the conference today that you guys have had has focused on answering one complex but essential question. What are all the levers we need to be pulling as we work to move families out of poverty, sustainability, in a measurable way? There are very specific data points and insights that could potentially help us create these solutions. The role that policy plays in creating barriers, but also the opportunities for a seismic change. And crucially, across it all, we must make sure that we have a real understanding of the actual challenges our communities face daily, and know from community members directly what solutions they truly want for their lives. This is not a one-size-fits-all problem. This is one of these issues that, as I've come to get deeper in understanding, that there are geographies in play, there's communities in play that change what causes poverty, and what are the solutions that can help radically change in those specific communities. So trying to make it just from the top down and not understanding the sort of the local level understanding of politics and what's moving those markets would be a shame if we did it that way. So using this opportunity to get very specific is important. We don't have the answers yet, but we know that these are all important aspects that must be explored as we continue learning about how to move families out of poverty. There's another important question that we need to consider that is entirely intertwined with everything that we've been discussing. The narrative about how society and poverty and the people living in poverty, those stories as societies tell that all around us in media, daily conversation, stories that have real impact on keeping folks in poverty. So like just the propaganda, sort of the, I don't want to use the word, but like just facts that are not really facts. Those words, yeah. When you get that information out there, it paints a picture that's very fuzzy about what's actually driving poverty. And in fact, sometimes if you just look at it and you don't get a chance to double click on it and get deeper, you would think it's a matter of somebody not wanting to work or being lazy or just whatever narratives they put out there. Not that there's systemic issues in the system that lead people to poverty. And without getting a better understanding of that, you don't have the empathy, the sympathy and the empathy for these situations that these people are going through. And we have the collective power in this room, the collective power, moral responsibility to help these folks. So getting a deeper understanding of the issues are clearly important. We know from the research, and you'll hear more of that a little later, that language and narrative are extraordinarily powerful in shaping our understanding of the world and influencing the way we frame our approaches to these collective challenges, from our national economy to global climate change to racism to poverty. So, you know, I have a marketing firm, and one of our big clients is a Kaiser Permanente, and the CEO of Kaiser is a very good friend of mine, great leader, CEO. His name is Bernard Tyson. And Bernard Tyson speaks a lot about mental health and the role that mental health plays in poverty. In fact, he says that in America, the healthcare system treats the body from the neck down. That mental health is something that's completely ignored. And I took that back as we took on the challenge for mental health, and I realized when I look at history, unfortunately or not, I've seen a different cause and effect when pop culture got involved. So I remember being a young man. I was 1982, maybe, or 84. Anyhow, my brother, my older brother, he was applied for the Army, and we got the letter back, and he couldn't go to the Army because he had, and it was the long word at the time, he had AIDS. So this is 1986, and they wouldn't let him in the Army, right? And it was the first time we had seen the word, and of course my mom was a nurse, and she was trying to get care for my brother, and she couldn't get it. My brother eventually passed away because of age-related symptoms or causes. So anyhow, and then all of a sudden we couldn't get anything done, and then like Rock Hudson had AIDS, and everybody's like, whoa, this is not about toilet seats and gay and needles. This is something else. This is not what we've been saying. This is not the propaganda that we've been putting out there, because Rock Hudson certainly isn't gay, right? Those old enough get the joke. Rock Hudson wasn't gay. So anyhow, then all of a sudden you started to see MTV, Madonna, Magic Johnson, HIV positive, coming out and talking about it. And all of a sudden it put pressure, pop culture put pressure on the CDC, and then all of a sudden solutions started to come. And it was pop culture doing that. And I noticed the same thing with sustainability. When Al Gore was in the White House, he couldn't get much done. Guy comes out the White House. I mean, he's seen what was taking place with glaciers while he's in the White House. He has classified information on such, but he can't get anything done. He gets out the White House, makes a movie, pop culture, The Inconvenient Truth. Leonardo DiCaprio endorses the movie. Everybody at the Academy Awards is giving him standing applause, and they start driving a Prius. And like, that's how these things work. So it's how pop culture gets involved, and it wouldn't shock me or surprise me when I look at what Robin Hood's doing, and I'm glad and proud to be able to address this room today and officially join the board recently, that some of what I can do is bring sort of the cultural currency of pop culture to the initiatives that we have to help do the same thing that I've seen in those two other examples, which is sort of shed a light on a problem and be very purposeful about it. So I think that's important because the information is wrong. So for example, there's a recent study by the Asian American Federation found that a number of Asians living in New York City are living in poverty. That number grew that the number of Asians living in poverty in New York City grew 44% in the last 15 years. But Asian Americans communities only receive 1.4% of the total value of the city's social service contracts and 1.5% of the total contract dollars, right? So that's non-facts, right? The facts you would think are that Asian Americans are doing really well and they're not suffering at poverty at clips numbers at this size. So therefore, that 1.5% would make sense. But when you see this number spiking and yet no one's doing the research to care about it and sort of none of the press or headlines highlight these issues, you would see an underserved market. When I first got in the advertising business in 2004, I officially went in the advertising business. I left the record business. I was the president of Columbia Records and then the president of Interscope Records. And I was doing fantastic, and I go into the advertising business. And why I called my company Translation was because when I got to the advertising business, I realized that I could actually make changes in some of the images that was being put out portraying let's call it black people. And I wanted to fix that. And I felt like I could make a shift. But what I realized when I started sitting with some of these big companies, they would go, well, African Americans only make up 12.9% of the population, so therefore we're going to only appropriate 12.9% of our dollars to the issue. And I'm sitting there, to help towards black media, and I'm sitting there going, that's not the right numbers. Well, what do you mean that's not the right numbers? We look at census numbers and 12.9%. And I'm like, well, look, if African Americans are driving sort of, when you speak about younger folks driving 50% of the cultural impact, why would you only put 12.9% of the money? That doesn't make any sense. In fact, the brands that are leading with ethnic insights are the brands that are winning in mass culture. So why would you do that? And you get these strange looks on their faces, and they bit back sometimes, look how much money we're spending on the Latin market. And I'm trying to figure out what's the correlation between the subject matter. And I realized that unless you make changes and go in there and have a seat at the table, there are people who will do anything not to get fired. That's why they make these decisions. They look at the math. They don't want to get fired. They don't want to lose their job. So they separate themselves from the truth because they can get it by in the system that they're in. And our job is to buck the system. Our job is to be very transparent about the truth and let them know that we came here for business and we came here for results. So there's a quote that I come back to. Change has never happened this fast before, and it'll never be this slow again. And you'll hear from our speakers, progress is possible, and there's an important role for each of us to understanding the story our nation tells about people in poverty that contribute to keeping people in poverty together influence the telling of a new one. Thank you.